Hey everybody, this is your 2-minute warning. We'll give it till probably about 12:03. Give people a chance to come into the room, and then we will get started proper. As we do with our sessions monthly, this one is also being recorded. Just a heads up on that.
Hey, Lauren. It's Melissa. Hi.
Our groups are
How
not
are you
usually this quiet. Nathan has changed his picture. I didn't recognize him until I wiggled my mouse around. All right, it's past the 2 minutes, so let's go ahead and get started. There may be others join us, and that's okay. Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. My name is Angie Barker Jackson, and I'm the Vice President for Institutional Advancement here at Berkeley School of Theology. We are delighted that you have joined us for today's bonus Monday Lunch and Learn, kind of out of the ordinary for us and a little bit different than our regular pattern, but we're grateful for your presence. Please introduce yourself in the chat if you haven't already. Love to know who you are and where you're zooming in from. No matter where you are or what time it is for you, we invite you to go ahead and have lunch or a snack during this time. That's why we call it Lunch and Learn. Just keep yourself muted if you don't mind. This series is sponsored and planned by the Alumni Engagement Office. Melissa LaBeouf, Assistant Director of Alumni and Donor Engagement, is co-hosting with me today. She'll be monitoring the chat, so throughout the presentation, be sure to drop your questions there for Q&A time. Melissa is your source for information about all future alumni events and our Lunch and Learn series. Thank you, Melissa. These Lunch and Learns have been designed with 3 purposes in mind: learning, connecting, and being. Each month, or this month, we have a bonus, features a different topic and a new guest. Our hope is that topics will stretch and challenge our minds, that we will connect and reconnect with others in the BST network, and that this will be a space of radical belonging. Today's guest presenter is Clayton Chamberlain with FreeWill, an online will and trust creation tool. BST partners with FreeWill to bring our entire community these easy-to-use resources for estate planning. I will let Clayton say more about that in his presentation. So, welcome, Clayton. We're delighted for you to share with us today, and I will give you the mic.
Wonderful. Just a second here. My Zoom has just decided that I need to re-log in.
Oh no.
Let me see if I remember my password. And
That never happens at a convenient time.
I know, seriously.
Just like
1
update.
second here.
Right. Every time I log in, it seems like it has to do an
We'll
update.
see
There
if
you
it
go.
lets
You
me.
got it.
Perfect. Maybe I had the right
You got it.
password. Who knows? Maybe it was divine intervention. We'll never know.
Awesome.
Anyway, it is great to be here with you all. My name is Clayton. I am the Senior Partner Success Strategist at FreeWill that's, been blessed to work with Berkeley School of Theology, as well as a number of our other seminaries and church partners as well here at FreeWill. A little bit about myself. I am, like I said, the Senior Partner Success Strategist working with BST. A little bit of what that means is that I'm here really to help provide strategy and guidance to BST as we share these resources with alumni, with members of churches who have supported BST in the past, essentially to do anything that I can to help get this tool in the hands of as many people as possible. A little bit about myself. I'm originally from the Midwest. I went to a very small seminary in the Midwest as well before moving to New England to help start a church in Rhode Island. And then most recently was one of the pastors on staff at a multi-site church here in Boston, which is where I live today, prior to working with FreeWill. So I am able to, offer you all not only my experience working in the church world as a pastor for about a decade, but also my experience from working with some really amazing churches and faith partners here at FreeWill. Here's just a snapshot of where we're going to be going today. We're going to talk, initially just about, hey, what is FreeWill? Why does FreeWill exist? What does FreeWill do? And then we're going to talk a little bit about how FreeWill can help your church and the members of your churches, followed by a demonstration of how the tool itself actually functions so that you can kind of see, what this actually looks and feels like to use this tool. And then we'll have a pause for some Q&A, followed by some next steps about how to actually share these tools with the members of your churches, with the people that God has entrusted to your care and leadership, and then another, pause for Q&A. So let's go ahead and dive in. What is FreeWill? I have this nice little 60-second video to share with you.
Is there sound?
There should be. That's what it was asking me to log in for, I think. If not, I will send Angie that video and she can pass that along afterward. Let's see here. That's okay. I can share that after. No problem. Here we go. So in a nutshell, FreeWill was created because we realized that somewhere around 67% of American adults do not have a legally valid or up-to-date will. And often, even when someone actually does go to a lawyer or an estate planning attorney to create a will, a trust, or an estate plan of their own, generosity and charitable giving is rarely prompted in those conversations. But generosity and charitable giving and stewardship, those are core tenets of our faith. And so we want to take these things really, really seriously when we talk about how to care for our loved ones and our families, and also when we talk about what kinds of legacies we want to create with our lives and the stewardship of everything that God has entrusted to us. So we were created as a company, FreeWill, because of a lack of awareness around charitable giving within estate planning, but even more generally, even more broadly, just a lack of awareness around how to care for our loved ones through estate planning in general, right? And if almost 70% of American adults don't have a legally valid or up-to-date will, that's a problem. That's obviously a problem. And I would say that's especially a problem that should be addressed within communities of faith, within church families. In addition to that, we are approaching a season which maybe you're familiar with. It's been called the Great Wealth Transfer. There is around $68 trillion that's going to be inherited. It's going to be passed on in the next 20 or so years. And so FreeWill wondered, what if we could make sure that a portion of that money went towards funding good things in our communities? And one of the reasons why I, as someone who's been a pastor, and really other members of our faith team who several of us have seminary backgrounds and pastoral backgrounds, one of the reasons why we were excited to come work at FreeWill was to be able to say, hey, while giving to many nonprofits is a worthwhile investment, what if we can empower people of faith to give in these ways to make sure that a percentage of this money went towards funding kingdom efforts and sharing our faith for generations to come? We also know that traditionally, only the top percentage or so of existing givers have had access to resources like this one. And so we wanted to flip that pyramid on its head and really make resources like this available to as many people as possible, regardless of their financial background, regardless of their financial means, regardless of their financial history. And so that's what we're doing. We're providing these kinds of resources to as many people as possible because we know, number one, being able to create an estate plan, being able to create a will or a trust has a tremendous impact on the well-being and future of a family. But also, when people do choose to give, these are likely to be the most significant gifts someone is ever going to give. I can tell you that's the case for me, unless something drastically changes with my family, in my future, I'm probably never going to be the person who is at the top of this pyramid that's going to be reached out to by the nonprofits that my wife and I support, or by a church, or anything like that. But I do know that the most significant gifts that we will ever give will be what we choose to pass on in our estate plan. So we are flipping this pyramid on its head and giving access to these tools to as many people as possible, regardless of their financial background and their financial means. And I really think, within the church, when we talk about free will, we almost need to see this within this broader shift of the way that we're talking about stewardship. I believe that there's a shift that's been happening, that's going to continue to happen in the next several years within the church on this topic. We've been spending decades talking about tithing, hearing people talk about tithing, giving 10%, but that really doesn't capture the trajectory of generosity that's in Scripture, and it certainly doesn't cultivate a lifestyle of generosity. Something like 97% of American wealth is held in non-cash assets. And the reality is that God owns all of that. And so when I was working in a church, I can tell you every message I ever gave on generosity or stewardship, I was really teaching people to be faithful with about 3% of what God had entrusted to them. And so, I think that that's a problem. I think that we need to talk about what it looks like to be stewards of things other than cash. We should be talking about what it means to be good stewards of the earth, of our relationships, of all the blessings that God has given us. And that includes the assets that, are currently in our possession that are not cash. And so that's what we're seeing. We're really broadening this conversation that we're able to have of what does it look like to live a lifestyle of gospel motivated generosity. And when we're thinking about estate plan giving, charitable giving in that way, I think that this really falls into a broader conversation about spiritual formation, right? If we're thinking about spiritual formation and discipleship as integrating our commitment to Christ and his kingdom into every aspect of our lives, then I think that having this conversation is a really, really natural one to have. And that's why free will exists. That's why we build the tools and the technology that we build. That's why we do what we do. We want to make the largest and most impactful gifts that your church members will ever give as easy as possible for them to give. And we also want them to know that they can give to their local church in these ways, because a lot of times what I have found from working in the church and from working at Free Will is folks just don't connect those dots. They don't realize that they can actually include their local church, the church that has played such a pivotal role in their spiritual development, the spiritual development of their families. They don't realize that they can include this group of people who has, celebrated with them when life has been great and supported with them when life has been really hard in their estate plan. And so we're making it as easy as possible for people to be able to give in ways that align with their faith and their values. Now, this is just a sampling of some of the ministries that we're working with today. And I just shared this with you, one, for a little bit of credibility building. We're working with a lot of seminaries, a lot of churches, a lot of denominations, but also to just let you know that in the broader world of nonprofits, even outside of the Christian nonprofits that we work with, there are a lot of organizations out there that are talking about planned giving, with members of your churches probably. But the reality is, your church is probably their number one point of connection. And so for them to be able to give in these ways to their local church is huge. And a lot of people, like I said, just don't connect those dots. They don't realize that that's a possibility for them. At the end of the day, we want to make these tools as easy to use and accessible to people as possible, because we believe that people of faith are generous and they want to give in ways that align with their faith and their values. They just need someone to give them the opportunity to do that. So essentially what we're doing is we're supporting your church and your church members in two ways. We're helping your church members protect their loved ones and plan for their future. at key life moments when they can sit down and make these, these documents that are really, really, providing a peace of mind. And we're also strengthening your church through the bequests that they're able to give you, although they don't have to do that. That's an option for them. But we are, helping them to make an investment in the future faithful mission and the vitality of their local church. Let's take a look at what this tool actually looks like when we're using it. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the Berkeley School of Theology FreeWill tool. When I do that, this is what the landing page looks like. I can hit start my free will, or I can actually make a trust. And for a lot of you in California, that's going to be a really, really big piece of this because, revocable living trusts, RLTs, are really, really popular in California, and for good reason, because of the lengthy probate process in California. So that is an option here as well. But I'm going to go ahead and start the will process, and I've already actually started one here. I've made my name Test, and I've put in a fake email. So I can go ahead and click through this. It's going to ask for some really basic information for me. And if anyone ever, wonders why is FreeWill asking for my birth date or something like that, they can click on this little question mark icon, and it's going to tell them exactly why we do that. It's just to make sure they're of legal age to fill out these documents. But one thing I want to mention on this page specifically is we are never asking for hypersensitive information. We are never asking for social security numbers. We're never asking for account logins. We're never asking for account numbers or anything like that in any sort of digital context. Anything that is more sensitive will be filled in by hand once the finished documents have been printed out. It's going to ask if I'm legally married. If I say yes, I can actually, put in my spouse's name. And once I do that, I'll have the ability to generate what's called a mirror will for my spouse at the end of this process, which just allows my wife to be protected as well, and really saves a lot of time because she doesn't have to, reinvent the wheel when she makes her will. But for the sake of time today, I'll go ahead and say no. It's going to ask if I would like, specifically because earlier I said I'm in California, if I would like to do an RLT or revocable living trust, because that is very popular in California. In other states, this will not show up as a suggestion a second time, even though, I initially selected will, because in my general information I put in California, we're reminding people, hey, you can do this too. And so that is an option for folks. I'm going to go ahead and stick with the will tool. It's going to ask if I have any children. I'll say no, but if I said yes, I could put in the name of my children. I could put in whether they're under the age of 18. And if they are, I can actually start the process of laying out the specifics for child guardianship if something were to happen to me and my wife. This is a really, really big piece, especially for members of churches, because really what this amounts to is, somebody can sit down and say, hey, we need to make sure that the person who's raising our kids, if something were to happen to us, shares our commitment to Christ and shares our kingdom-shaped values and is going to raise our children the way that we would want them to be raised. And this is one of the biggest reasons why someone who's like in their 30s and 40s sits down to make a will, is because they have a child, they have two children, and maybe their pastor says to them after a child dedication Sunday, hey, I just want to let you know we have this resource for you. You should really sit down and take a look at this. And this is a really wonderful, piece of this, and provides a lot of peace of mind. For the sake of time today, I'm going to say no, even though that actually was the reason my wife and I sat down and made a will as well. It's going to ask if I have any pets. You can also provide for pet guardianship, believe it or not. You can set aside money, for your cat to be taken care of if something were to happen to you. Going to ask if I would like to list out my assets or if I would like to just estimate the total value of my assets. Most people will just estimate the total value. If someone is a pretty high net worth individual, they might list out their assets to basically see, what kind of estate tax they might encounter. I'll go ahead and say I'll estimate the value of my assets, and we just ask if people are working with a financial advisor or not. I'll say no. Then I'm going to estimate the value of my estate. So I'll just select a window here of where I think my estate value falls within. And really the only thing you need to know about this is if someone were to give a gift to your church, most of the time it's a percentage-based gift, and we're just using this window to kind of estimate what the value of that percentage-based gift is, if they were to give like a 10% or a 5% gift of their estate. And then we arrive at the actual giving page itself, where folks can either give a gift to Berkeley School of Theology, or they can click here and type in the information of their local church or another nonprofit that they support. And when they do that, they can actually select a percentage-based gift if they would like to, or they can do a fixed cash sum. And then they also can leave a message, to say, hey, this is the church my children were baptized in, my grandchildren were baptized in. Thank you so much for the impact of your faithful ministry on the lives of our family, something like that. I'll go ahead and, just for the sake of time, give a gift to the seminary fund as well, so that we can just kind of see how this gift tracks through the process. It's going to ask if I'd like to let the nonprofits that I'm supporting know who I am. This is a nice feature just because, if we go back to those slides earlier, something like only 7% of estate plans include a gift to a nonprofit. And none of those gifts, unless the person goes out of their way to tell the nonprofit, hey, I've included you in my will, they just don't know. They don't know that it's coming. They don't know to expect it. They don't know who they think they might hear from. So this is a nice feature just to let them know. And, it really just allows them to thank you and invite you into deeper and more meaningful partnership in the mission of the church that you're supporting, or the nonprofit, the ministry that you're supporting. So I'll say yes. And then it's going to ask me what I want to do with the other 90% of the value of my estate. So I'll add a person. I'll type in test, and I'll say this is a sibling. And we have this nice calculator feature where if I try to give away 95% in addition to the 10%, it actually won't let me continue because I'm trying to give away more than 100% of the value of my estate. So we will hit 90, and now I can move on. And it's going to ask if test, that hypothetical sibling doesn't survive me, what do I want to do with that person's share of their inheritance from my estate? I can give it to their unnamed descendants, both now and future. I can give that to charity, or I can break this out into another custom plan where I do a mixture of multiple individuals and multiple charities. That's an option. I'll just go ahead and, for the sake of time, hit descendants because it's a one-click option. And then finally, essentially this is called a takers of last resort clause in a will. And this is just covering your bases if, for whatever reason, you were to never update your will, which we actually tell you at the end of this when you should think about updating your will, what types of life events and what types of time periods you should do that in. If you were to never update your will, and if everyone you named in your will were to pass away, you can leave this to a charity, that of your choosing. I'll go ahead and just say leave it to my unnamed heirs. And then this is a summary of what I've just done. If this looks right, I'll hit save and continue. Otherwise, I'll go back. But this looks right to me. Now I'm going to be able to give specific gifts to specific people or specific nonprofits. Essentially, this is like, my father's desk that he worked at for his whole career that he might want to pass on to one of his kids, that kind of a thing. Or my grandfather's Bible that he preached from every Sunday, passing that on to one of his children, or to, someone from his church. That would be an option. This is totally optional though. I'll hit save and continue just for the sake of time. This is, from a ministry perspective, a really great feature. This is not something that shows up when you just sit down and make a will. Most times, this is not something that just comes up organically. This is where you can actually plan out your funeral service right here, so that the people who, your surviving relatives or your friends and family, they don't have to guess. And, as someone who's been a pastor, as a person of faith, I certainly would affirm that death has lost its ultimate sting, but losing a loved one still stings. And I've been there when these things are put together, and I've been there when these things are not. And I can tell you that it does make a really big difference when there's no guesswork, there's no questioning or God forbid, arguing about what grandpa would have wanted or would not have wanted. And so just being able to have this written down is really, really wonderful. I'll go ahead and hit save and continue. I'm going to be able to choose my executor. And then, because of the digital world that we live in today, I can also name a separate digital executor. So maybe that hypothetical sibling of mine is my sister. And, actually she's really bad with technology, but her son isn't. So maybe I named my nephew as my digital executor of my estate. But in this case, she is totally capable of doing this role. So I will go ahead and just say, nope, she's okay to do that. And she can have access to my digital communications. It's going to ask if I'd like to include a no contest clause. This is the portion of the will flow, as we call it, where we're going to make some decisions that will have impact for how this will is carried out after it's been filed. And if anyone has questions about a no contest clause and what that means, we have that handy question mark icon again, just to let you make an informed decision about what you want to do with that. For the sake of time today, I'll say no. It's also going to ask me if I'd like to, give permission for my estate to be administered outside of court supervision, which for folks in California is relevant. And you can actually read about, what does this mean if I say yes? What does this mean if I say no? What's it mean if I actually say nothing? So we have those three options here, those three legal options here. I'll go ahead and say no for the sake of time. And then lastly, we're going to be asked if we want to include a personal statement. This is another really nice feature that doesn't come up a lot in the will making process outside of free will, but from a ministry perspective, I really love this. So when I was working at church, most recently the church that I worked at, whenever we would baptize someone, we encouraged them to write down a little bit of their story of how they came to this decision, and how they would tell the story of their encounter of the grace and the love of God, and how they would tell the story of their experience of the community of faith that they had found. And because this was written out, we would invite them to read this in front of the people who had showed up to support them as they're making this decision. This is the kind of thing that I would encourage someone to add here. Because essentially, when this will is enacted after someone has passed away, that document is going to come along with it, and it is going to be read aloud afterward. And so this is a really great feature to be able to, tell that story and cast a vision for, your hopes and dreams and your prayers for your surviving friends and family to have that same sort of experience that you've had. I'll hit save and continue. And then I'm going to be given a list of really a summary of everything that we've done here in this quick run through. And if anything didn't look right, I could go back and hit edit, and it would take me right back to that page. And if this looks right, I'll hit save and continue. And finally, I can actually download my will. So when I download my will, I can save this. I will open it. And this is the will. So the cover letter is actually your next steps to make this will legally valid in your state. We're actually working with both our in-house legal team here at FreeWill, and then also a team of, I think it's around 60 lawyers across the country and in all 50 states, to make sure that this tool is always kept up to date with the legal requirements in all 50 states at all times. So this is your next steps to make sure that this will is legally valid in your state. And also some best practices, keeping it safe, where you should store it, who you should share it with, how often you should update it, and when you should update it, those kinds of things. So this is really great. This actually comes printed out. When you print out your will and you go to sign it, this comes with it. So really, really helpful, really, really helpful there. And then we actually get into the will itself. And as I scroll down, you can actually see the gifts that I gave to BST. And if I had given a gift to my local church, you would see that here as well. And then any other wishes that I had made in that process. Also, once someone has made a will on FreeWill, they have access to this tool for life. So they can update this will on here really simply, for free anytime they want. They also can, plan out an advanced healthcare directive or a durable financial power of attorney. They can plan out the beneficiaries of their non-probate assets, their life insurance plans, their 401ks, those kinds of things. So a lot of really, really great stuff in here that really, provides a lot of peace of mind for folks as they are dealing with what can be kind of a scary and, intimidating topic. So that is a run through of your tool. And I wanted to pause here and just see, does anyone have any questions about anything we've talked about so far? No? All right, sounds good. Let's talk about what you can do coming out of this call today. So the first thing I would encourage you to do is communicate with this tool to the members of your churches. I would just say understanding these tools and talking about these tools really sort of normalizes these tools and normalizes this topic with your church family. And I would also say talk about this with your volunteers and your staff. Obviously, this tool is really great for planned giving, but also, for any of the pastors or church staff or church volunteers that we have on this call today, I would encourage you to view this as a tool in your ministry tool belt. I don't know many pastors who got into their roles because they're passionate about development, but they're passionate about God and they're passionate about people. And so I would encourage you to view this as one of the ways that you can care for your community. I would also say if you don't have a will, if you are one of those 68% of American adults who do not have a will, set a goal to make one of those for yourself this year, a will or a trust. Walk through the steps, experience those feelings for yourself. My wife and I have a will, and we revisit it every few years, and it's a relief to know that we have that taken care of. And I would encourage you to do the same. If you already have a will and you just want to see, test this tool out for yourself, you can do that. Just make your name test, and I would use a fake email like I did today. And then if you don't have a will, but you already have an attorney, maybe someone in your church that you want to work with, that you want to give business to, I think that's great. At the end of the will flow process, instead of downloading the will, you can click a separate button that actually downloads a conversation guide for you to be able to sit down with an attorney and talk through all the wishes that you had just enumerated on this tool in such a way that is a little bit more efficient and maybe saves you a little bit of money because it's a conversation guide that saves time. So that would be my number one recommendation. Talk about this with the members of your church. Number two, I would say talk about this at key moments. So take advantage of the resources that you're going to have through BST. There is going to be a resource document sent out following this meeting that includes an email for you to be able to send to the members of your church to say, hey, the third week of August is National Estate Planning Awareness Week. We want 100% of our church family to have a plan in place to care for their loved ones and to prepare for their future and invest in the ministries they love. We want 100% of our church family to be able to sit down and plan a legacy that preaches the gospel the same way their life does. That's what we want. And so we're sharing this resource that's been sponsored by BST with you today. So we have an email that does that. We have a Sunday announcement that can be made the Sunday before that email goes out that just says, hey, basically that same thing I just said, and just reminds people, check your email inbox this week for more information. We have newsletter blurbs that you can use, social media blurbs that you can use, and we're going to be sending out also website content so that you can actually list this tool on your website. So that folks can find that really, really easily if they happen to lose that email. And like I just mentioned, remember special promotion dates. National Estate Planning Awareness Week is October 20th through the 27th. So that's the angle that we sort of wrote this content around. So we would definitely encourage you to utilize that. And then also in addition to, sort of those main, National Estate Planning Awareness Week type events, I would encourage you, like I said, just to think of this as a tool in your ministry tool belt. As I mentioned earlier, if we're thinking about discipleship as integrating our commitment to Jesus into every aspect of our lives, then there's a lot of times when this kind of a tool, this kind of a resource can be really, really powerful for people. If you're having an estate planning seminar, if you're having premarital counseling as a young couple is about to start their new life together, this is a great resource for them to have to make sure that they're planning that life to care for each other and to care for any children they might have in the future. A number of the churches that I work with also provide this on child dedication Sundays or as part of their discipleship curriculum, to be able to sit down and say, hey, we want you to you don't have to give a gift to us, we just want you to plan a legacy that proclaims the gospel the way your life does. And so we're providing you with this resource to do that. There's a lot of opportunities to be able to weave this into your sort of ministry playbook that you're already doing. And really the possibilities are honestly just about endless. Third, I would say empower your staff and volunteers, of course, sharing this with them and just saying, hey, we want 100% of our church to have something like this in place, whether they do it through free will or, go to an attorney. We want them to have something. And we would love for you to lead the way in that, lead the charge in that, and sit down and make a will for you and your loved ones as well. And then fourth, sharing best practices across, your ministry partners, sharing best practices across, back to BST or with other churches that are on this call, churches that you know of, and just, learning from each other and sharing what has worked, sharing what maybe hasn't worked, so that we can all get better at talking about these kinds of things within the context of our churches and our ministries. Because the bottom line here that I really want to drive home is that giving should reflect the things that are important in your lives, in the lives of the members of your church. And we want to empower them to give in a way that reflects their faith and priorities. And even beyond charitable giving, even beyond, generosity, we want to empower them to care for their loved ones and plan for their futures in a way that aligns with their faith commitments. And doing so, providing that opportunity, I think will strengthen our churches and our church family over time. I really believe that. Any questions?
There have to be some questions out there. Y'all are the quietest group we've ever had.
I have a question.
Yes.
Hi, Clayton. Thank you for this presentation. My husband and I finally did this. We didn't do it through free will, but we did do something. And I think one of the, reasons you probably encounter people being hesitant is that it can feel like an overwhelming task, right? There's a lot to think through, and you're not always at a season of life where you're even able to answer all the questions that there might be. So I assume that when you go through that free will process, that there's kind of like opportunities to come back to previous sections, kind of save for later. And would your recommendation be like, just get it started? And even if you have a little bit of information in there, it's better than nothing at all. That's my first question. And second question is, does that stand? Like, if you only got it partially done and didn't complete all the sections, and then you were to pass away, is the parts that you completed, like, are they good to go? Do you understand my question?
That's a good question.
That's a really good question. So in general, I typically say, hey, I'm not here to give legal advice, but I can tell you with this instance, first of all, absolutely it's better to sit down and start it versus not start it. We do, though, have some resources on our website. We have a blog that's sort of public facing. And there's a couple blog entries on there about like an estate planning checklist. And it includes the types of documents that really make up a holistic estate plan, including like an advanced healthcare directive and those kinds of things. But it also has a little bit of what are the types of documents that you want to have handy, and what are the types of questions that you want to have thought about when you sit down to make your will, to help it be possible for you to do it in one sitting. The other thing I would say is, you can always come back and edit this. So if you come to a question that you're just really not sure about, and probably the most common one, if I were to guess, is child guardianship. A couple sits down to work on this after the kids are in bed, and they get to that question, and both spouses think, oh, it's just going to be my parents, or it's going to be my brother. And then they're like, we're not on the same page.
Thankfully, my husband and I both agreed it would not be his parents. You know what I mean?
Well, that's good.
The one that
That's good.
the one that actually gave me pause was the one about your preferences for your funeral. And I was like, oh, I'm not ready to think about that yet. I mean,
Yeah,
I know I need to and should. It would be helpful to my family, but it's like in the flow, it was like, whoa, that's going to take a little more time. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So that specifically is one of the optional pages. Like you'll notice, or you probably noticed, I didn't fill it out. I just clicked through. That's totally fine. When you do this, you are able to come back anytime and finish what you started. Or even if you finish it and you say, I just want to get it finished, I'll come back and make changes. You can do that too. The first page where I put in my basic information with my email, once I've done that page, the very first page, I actually get an email. That's why I always use a fake email. I actually get an email to make an account so I can always log back in and finish what I started with this or any other document. To the second part of your question, it is not legally binding if you only start the process. It also is not legally binding in, I'm going to guess any state, but this is where I'm really not here to give legal advice because there are such different qualifications from state to state. I'm glad we have such a broad legal team. You actually have to print it out and you have to sign it, and depending on what state, the notary and witness qualifications are different, but those things have to happen for this to actually be a legally valid and binding will. Great question. Thanks for asking that.
I'm really glad you gave that reminder because I did mine about a month ago, but I have not printed it and done all of the signatures and the witnessing and all of that. So this has been a good reminder to me that I'm not done yet, even though it felt like I was done when I did it. So that's really good. Melissa, did I see a question flash through in the chat a minute ago?
Yeah, there's a question. Can non-citizens fill this out?
Absolutely. So I work with a number of ministries and churches and denominations that have folks they're communicating to in really especially the southern part of the US and the western part of the US. And yes, you can do this without being a citizen. You can be assured of privacy when you use this tool. Your information is not shared. We actually don't even store it. So that's all, good to go. The only thing is if you don't speak English, if the person making the will doesn't speak English, we don't currently offer the tool in Spanish or any other language. Because of our high value on legal integrity, we would not be satisfied with simply putting this through some sort of translation tool. We actually would want to have a legal expert sit down and do the translation. So we just haven't done that yet. That said, we actually do have some multilingual resources that I can send over to Angie to pass along. We have some blog posts that we've had translated into Spanish by legal experts, as well as some other resources. I typically recommend if someone only speaks Spanish or another language and they're sitting down to make this, find a trusted advisor from trusted relative, trusted friend, trusted member of their church to sit down and answer any questions they might have along the way. I also have worked with churches who have put on in-person events as well, staffed with volunteers who are bilingual to help make this process easier for folks. But absolutely, that's a long answer to a short question. You do not have to be a citizen to use this tool.
Thanks, Clayton. Are there any other questions in the room before we think about wrapping up soon?
I have one more question. Clayton, in your team's work with different churches, do you see any trends or patterns around the types of churches, whether that's demographically, culturally, or just the type of pastoral leadership, where you find you can get more traction with this type of work, and or patterns where that you see where it's like, oh, it tends to be more challenging in churches like this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the only churches that I have had a hard time getting traction with are the ones who only see this as a stewardship resource or only as a resource for charitable giving. And I know that I talked about this for part of this presentation as a resource for charitable giving, because of course it is, and of course that's part of our company's sort of legacy. We are a company that resources nonprofits, right? That said, across the spectrum, across the racial demographics, socioeconomic demographics, parts of the country, and sizes of churches, all the churches I work with who see this as a resource to integrate into their ministry playbook, their ministry toolkit are successful, both in terms of the number of wills generated, right? That number is symbolic of number of families helped, number of families ministered to with this tool, and also number of gifts given. And the reason there is a connection there a little bit, even when you don't ask for a gift, which I would say most churches are not asking for a gift with this tool. 1 in 5 to 1 in 6 people who use this tool across FreeWill's partners, church and non-church partners, give a gift to the nonprofit that sent them there. That percentage is much higher with churches, actually. The churches that I work with, I just had a lunch and learn with a church in Florida a few weeks ago, and their percentage of people who give a gift, who use the tool, is like 60%, and they don't ask for gifts. They just provide this as a resource. They provide this also as a resource at their community health events that they're putting on with their community partners. They partner with a local community health organization, and they have, pamphlets and a booth that they have set up, just reminding people, hey, if you don't have a will, we are providing this to you for free. We want you to have access to this. This is an important thing for you to do for your family. So yeah, long answer to another short question. If you integrate this into your sort of way of doing ministry, whether it's new parent orientation or new parent welcome packets for your children's ministry, having this in there so they can plan child guardianship, whether this is at marriage retreats and you provide this as a resource coming out of that, any of those kinds of things, it's going to be successful. Great question.
Very good question. Nathan says he appreciates the info and how this can make estate planning very accessible. Thanks, Nathan.
On a personal note, I will say a relative of mine passed away September 5th of this month, and my wife is their executor of their estate, and she's going through the documents, and nothing's been updated for 20 years. And so having printed out with the will, like you do on FreeWill, a reminder of, hey, every 5 or 10 years, update this. A reminder of, hey, if you move to another state, update this. If you have another child or another grandchild, update this, because you'll want to name them as a beneficiary. Those kinds of things, I think it's really, really helpful to just have that printed out with the will and a reminder of who to give it to. So no one has to go looking for it. No one has to go digging through an office to find this. No one has to, be asking the spouse of the deceased, did they have a lawyer? Who was the lawyer? Do you have the phone number? All of that's just taken care of. All the information you need is right there for you. And I think that's really, really helpful.
Very good. Last call for questions. Okay. Thank you, Clayton. This was really, really helpful. And I appreciate so much the way you encouraged us to think about this tool as a pastoral care tool, a ministry tool to have in our toolbox. That was really, really helpful. And I think gives us, to our leaders, some imagination for having these conversations in a way that's not kind of like dark, right? And depressing, but instead comes from a place of deep care. So I appreciate that very much. Thank you for being with us today to share the tool. It's really been a gift to have you here. Before we log off, we always have a couple announcements to make. I was a scout leader when my children were young, and we used to say announcements, a terrible way to die. And there's a whole song about that if you are ever in scouts, but we'll make it short because we don't want to die by announcement. 2 things. Our normal, regularly scheduled First Friday Lunch and Learn will be this Friday, October 4th, featuring BST board member and local pastor, Reverend Dr. Dwight Webster. He will lead us in a session called Not Without a Song. Please join us. Melissa dropped the registration link in the chat. This should be a fun journey through the history of gospel music in the United States. So please come if you can. And then finally, in 2 weeks from Thursday, on October 17th, BST's Center for Truth, Racial Healing, and Restorative Justice will host its fall lecture. This year's guest lecturer is Amanda Tyler, Executive Director of the Baptist Joint Committee on Religious Liberty, the BJC, and she'll be doing a lecture on the dangers of Christian nationalism. We hope you can join us if you're in the Bay Area. Thanks again, everyone, for being here today. We look forward to seeing you at another event soon. Thanks again, Clayton. Take care, everyone.